If you can understand exactly the information that I'm going to share with you in this video and act upon it, then guess what? You're going to massively outperform 95% of the people invested in crypto, because you're going to understand exactly when to take profits on your crypto coins and when to exit crypto completely at the top of the bull market. You're going to realize that crypto is pumping right now for one reason and will continue to pump for at least the next few months. You will understand that the whole of crypto is closely linked to a 4-year cycle that has nothing to do with the Bitcoin halving cycle, but has everything to do with games being played by the banks, billionaires, Donald Trump, and even the US Federal Reserve. If you can understand all of these things, you're no longer going to need to rely on the media for misleading information, but you're going to understand exactly for yourself what drives these markets so that you can maximize your profits during the crypto bull market ahead. If that sounds good, hit the like button and let's get into today's video. Now guys, before we dive in and find out all about the shady stuff that's been going on behind the scenes over the last few years that's meant crypto goes up and down at any given time, we need to look at what's been happening to crypto in the very short term. You see, Bitcoin has pumped up nearly $13,000 from a recent low that it put in the other day. And in that same period of time, Casper is up nearly 50%, Pendle up over 80%, Tau Potenza up nearly 90%. Have we seen the bottom, or are things going to get worse from here? Well, if you've been subscribed to House of Crypto with the notification bell turned on over the last few weeks, or you've been following my Twitter account, which is Peter_THOC, link down below, then you will have realized that we have seen the bottom of the market, that the markets are moving very closely with the M2 money supply. Every time we get a good shove towards the upside, we see Bitcoin and the altcoins going with it. But don't worry, this video isn't focusing in on the M2 money supply, but it's understanding why the M2 money supply will continue to get much bigger and towards the end of the year, something that we need to happen to see a massive Bitcoin valuation at the end and huge altcoin season. I said it. An altcoin season will happen, and it's because we see this pattern every single 4-year period, and it's going to happen again, and I'm going to prove it to you. So who bought the dip? Well, according to Dr. Crypto 47, the Bitcoin whales were buying at the exact right times again. How is it that every single time we see a major panic scare event in the markets, the billionaires, the smart money always seem to time the right entry? Do they know something that we don't? Well, they probably do, and that's what I'm going to teach you in this video so that you can think more like they do. You see, they understand something that many out there don't understand, and it's not as simple as just buy the dip, buy the fear, but it's understanding why those fear events come round every 4 years or so. And you see, it's all linked to what happened back in 2008. That's a long time ago. But don't worry, I'm going to explain this to you, and if you can pay attention and understand it, it's really going to change the game for you. Okay, I've kind of been understanding this loosely over the last few years, but I really knuckled down and started to learn more about it since like January. And since then, it's given me a huge confidence in being able to hold while the market's in max fear, like it was the other day with all the tariff news. It allowed me to just calmly and confidently put videos out telling you that crypto was going to continue going up without any worry. And it allowed me to not flip-flop around like other people out there who don't really understand what's really driving the markets. But understanding this, you're going to be able to calmly look at what's going on and make smart decisions. Okay, back in 2008 was when Bitcoin came out. Interestingly, this then led to a 4-year cycle, but not the halving cycle. It coincides with this. That's why people think that that's what's driving the market, but it's not, okay? It's this one thing. 2008, financial crisis. What happened? Lehman Brothers, major US bank, goes under. Bear Stearns, major US bank, goes under. Various other US banks very nearly went under, like Merrill Lynch, but they didn't. Why didn't they? Because the US bailed them out. How did they bail them out? Did they bail them out with all the money that they had stored away? No. They created new money from thin air. How do they do it? Multiple ways. Through inflation, basically printing more money and devaluing their own currency, but also by creating bonds. They sold bonds and they sold the debt to other countries. So China, other countries that had been growing their economies quite steadily over the last few years, went and bought US debt. But they obviously didn't do it for free. They wanted to be able to earn some money off of that. And this is important because this happened in and around 2009. Okay, a lot of the debt was bought up in 2009, which started the whole 4-year cycle running. Now let's understand what this really means. If you have a loan for, let's say, a car or a house or something, you're probably paying interest on that loan. But every few years, for example, with a house, you might try and go and change the mortgage provider who's giving you that loan. Why? Because right now you might have a mortgage that's costing you like 3%. But in a few years, maybe you can go and get that mortgage changed and start paying like 2% for a different provider. This is basically refinancing and going and look at refinancing your particular debt. This is the exact same for the US and other countries around the world who also bailed themselves out around this point. Now, from 2009, a lot of the debts matured after around 4 years. That meant that US was then called upon to repay its debts after 4 years to China or whoever it borrowed money from. But guess what? They couldn't do it. They couldn't repay their debt because they didn't have the money. So what do? They take another loan. They take another loan, hopefully with lower interest rates. With high interest rates, it means their loans are going to be very expensive. Right now, the interest rates are really, really high. Does the US want to take on more debt and refinance its debt right now? Absolutely not. And that's going to lead us on to what happens later. But anyway, this happens every 4 years. Governments basically have to refinance their debt. They have to decrease interest rates to try and take on more debt so that they can reduce the amount it's going to cost them to take on their debt. They then have to print more money, pump more money into the economy, make times all good again, until the economy starts to break later on into the cycle. Now, this happens every 4 years and has continued to happen over the last few years, and that's why we've had multiple bull markets. Every time we see that easing coming in, before that period of refinancing, we see a bull market that emerges. Okay, so the easing comes in, interest rates come down, we see the refinancing of the debt, we then see the interest rates starting to climb again later on as the cycle. Okay, this happens time and time again. Now, 2020 is a different story, and it's what's going to lead to a huge bull market this time round. Okay, and let me just stop myself right there, because this bull market is not going to be massive because, oh, Donald Trump's investing in Bitcoin and because Michael Saylor keeps buying Bitcoin. It's not why, okay? It's happening because fundamentally crypto represents a risk asset in the kind of risk curve of things. When the markets, global markets are bad, people invest in bonds. When the markets start to improve, they start to invest in stocks. They start to invest in NASDAQ. They then eventually start to invest in Bitcoin. They then essentially start to go into altcoins. And then they go to eventually into like NFTs and meme coins and the crazy degenerate end of the cycle. That's where we go. Okay, that's where we go every time. That's why crypto will blow up. That's why we get an altcoin season. Okay, so hopefully you're still with me. Right? We see the refinancing of debt going on every sort of 4 years or so. Now, what happened in 2020? I hear you cry. Do you remember the masks? Do you remember the lockdowns? Do you remember the spending a lot less money and getting in shape because you hadn't been out boozing so much and actually it's probably pretty good for you to have a bit of a lockdown? COVID, right? COVID-19, 2019. Okay, happened in 2020. If it's real or not, I'm not here to conspire. But this was an important event. Why? Because it crashed global markets pretty much. Again, what happened? Global markets then need to stimulate in a massive way. Why? Because they needed to pay people to kind of continue to stay alive. They needed to pay to people who could still then go and pay for food and people who lost their jobs and keep businesses alive and keep the banks afloat. Huge, huge, huge stimulus goes into the market. So guess what happens? Now, 4 or 5 years later, the US is now having to refinance its debt that it took on in 2020 for the COVID blowout. They spent so much money and they had to print so much money and create so much debt in 2020. They have now massive, massive repayments. And here's where it gets very exciting. Okay, the repayments can only happen once the interest rates are lower. The refinancing can only happen once the interest rates come down, once we see QE. They can't happen otherwise. The US has massive, massive debt that it can't refinance unless they start to bring down their own rates. And it's the Fed who has to do this. The Fed knows this. And the Fed knows this. And guess what? All the big banks know this. And Donald Trump knows this. And they're all in on the same game. Okay, because they have to create fear, scary, dangerous, worrying times in markets to be able to start to reduce interest rates and allow the Fed to tell everyone that it's okay to reduce interest rates and to push inflation higher again, because we have to do it, otherwise the economy goes under. And how do they do it? They scare the market. They scare the market into making ordinary people think that the market's screwed. We need to cut rates. The rate cuts come in after we see massive scare events in the markets. Where's the scare event in the market? I hear you cry. The initial tariff news, and then all the other subsequent tariff news that happened. This is why the big money, smart money, was all accumulating during these periods of time, because they all know their game. They know that every single time these market crazy, scary times are created out of thin air, and the media is the tool that's used to push it to you, that they can refinance their debt effectively. Okay, so what we're going to see right now, before we start to see lots of refinancing, is a fear event that's going to cause the Fed to have to pivot to start to do QE and to start to do other things. We've already seen quantitative tightening massively reduced, and we're very close to seeing rate cuts and other things. Now, ultimately, we will see M2 continue to rise, whether or not we get rate cuts like tomorrow or not. We'll see M2 pumping towards the upside. That's what's driving crypto. But the rate cuts and the QE is essential for seeing more of that move into the degenerate end of the cycle. What's the degenerate end of the cycle? The degenerate end of the cycle is when people are aping into NFTs worth millions and millions of dollars. This is where we get our altcoin season. Rate cuts are probably needed for that full-blown altcoin season to happen, okay? But right now you see Bitcoin rising. We will see Bitcoin continuing to rise until at least somewhere around the 7th of July. Now, what happens to the M2 after that, I don't know, but we have a nice 10 to 12 week lead on this that gives us a good clue. Okay, this rises every time it rises. You can see these green boxes. Bitcoin rises. Okay, this is why the markets are moving right now. But to see a kind of a degenerate kind of altcoin season, crazy time in the markets, I do think we need rate cuts and we do need QE. But those things are coming because the Fed has to pivot, because they have to start bailing everyone out. And the tariff Trump drama and all this kind of like drama between the Federal Reserve and Donald Trump is probably all a complete smokescreen, and they're probably best mates behind the scenes. But the Fed needed this kind of crazy, scary event for them to be able to cut rates, okay? Now, I've made videos previously telling you that when the news is telling you that we're going to go into recession and everything, you need to check the data and understand the charts and be completely calm. All of the data was telling us that actually the markets were fine. Not necessarily fine, but not that bad. We saw the dollar dumping like crazy. You don't see the dollar dumping like crazy when a recession is about to hit. All of the banks, all of the media is in on this game. And here we go. You need to understand what I'm talking about right now. Because if you can understand what I'm talking about right now, you're going to ignore the media. The media is designed to distract you into doing something stupid. Selling when the market's down here, buying when the market's up here. Okay? Buying when the market's up here, selling when the market's down here. And they do it to you every single time. And how do I know this? Well, look, just the other day, we had so much news circulating around saying we're going into recession, JP Morgan telling everyone that we're going into recession. Around that time, there was no real data behind the scenes that was telling you that the banks were doing anything that indicated that they were actually panicking. Let's think back to the top of the last bull market. You can see, the 8th of November. Look at the news article JP Morgan dropped on the 8th of November. JP Morgan predicts that Bitcoin's going to go to 146k and in the short term is going to reach $73,000. In and around this time, JP Morgan and all of the major banks were selling crypto. They gave you a price prediction just up here, telling you that you could eke out a few more dollars. You should just stay in the market. And then guess what happens? Market sells off against you. All of the news and media is always incredibly bullish here to keep you in the game. All of the news and media is incredibly bearish here. It happened here with the Japan carry trade. It happened here with the tariff trade drama. It's always, always, always at the bottom of the market. Smart money always, always, always accumulates in these zones. And they do it because they understand basically what's going on behind the scenes. They understand that there is a 4-year cycle. That any events that are happening in the kind of year of worry and panic and fear are all basically designed so that the Federal Reserve has an excuse, a reason to publicly cut rates and reduce quantitative tightening. This has been going on for years, since 2008, and will continue to happen into the future. What happens in the very, very short term, today, tomorrow, I don't know. And no one does. And yeah, you can look at a chart all the time, but really, we don't go down this low again because we've already seen max fear and max pain. And M2 money supply is driving the markets and pumping, okay? Right now, this is probably one of the most useful ones you can use. It's called M2 Money Shift for Bitcoin. You can use this to predict pretty much every major move up that we've had in the markets over the last few years. You could have used it to predict the top of the last bull market. Now, I like to use it 11 to 12 week delay. And you could have even used this indicator to sell the exact top of the last bull market. Now, as you can see here, the M2 continues to climb, okay? But the crypto market dumps off a good few weeks, months ahead. Why? Because if you go and select on this indicator and you go to inputs, and you'll see that the EU M2 starts to top out in line with these top outs here. Okay, here again, you get the second lower high. This is very key to note because the M2 on the EU drops to the downside. but more importantly, which other one drops? It's the Japan M2, which you can see tops out here, then kind of puts in a lower high, and then it drops. These two indicators tell you why the crypto market ended here, whereas all of the global M2 points towards the upside. If you get into the weeds this much and you understand there's stuff driving these markets that is so much more accurate than what certain influencers are saying, than what the media is saying, then you're going to have a good chance of being able to take profits. Because guess what? When we get to the top of the bull market, wherever that Bitcoin price stops, you're not going to want to sell because your monkey mind is telling you to stay in this game because of confirmation bias. You're going to seek out every YouTuber and his dog who's telling you to keep buying and telling you the market's going to go up. You're going to love the news where JP Morgan tells you you're going to get richer and richer, and you're just going to get stuck. But you don't want to be that guy. So make sure you're subscribed to the House of Crypto, notification bell turned on. Now guys, also I have a new channel, The School of Crypto, where I talk about the different day trades and things that I'm taking. If you want to go and catch some of the trades over there, then make sure you go across and subscribe to The School of Crypto. Now, if you are wanting to go and buy into any particular crypto coins right now, then I highly recommend you use an exchange that does not require KYC, is accessible in pretty much every country, has some of the lowest fees available across crypto, and huge deposit bonuses available through my links down below. And these two are some of my favorites. I use Bitunix and I use WEEX every single day because they have a huge range of different altcoins, no KYC required, and they offer some of the lowest fees market-wide. They also come with some really exciting sign-up bonuses, so make sure you use my links down below if you want to go in and get involved in crypto. Remember, in the short term, it's very difficult to tell exactly what's going to happen from day to day in crypto, okay? But in the longer term, over the next few weeks ahead, we can expect to see crypto continuing to pump towards the upside like absolute crazy because the M2 is expanding like you would not believe. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video, found it useful. If you found it difficult to sort of keep up with, I appreciate there's a lot. Go and watch it again. And if you haven't already, then just hit the like button. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.